My beloved child. Pause here for a moment. There is something gentle moving through the unseen places of your story, and if your heart has been searching for even the smallest sign that hope is still alive, then perhaps these words have found you for a reason. There are moments so ordinary that most people would never notice them. A familiar street. A quiet afternoon. A mirror catching the light. A shirt hanging in a closet that has been worn countless times without a second thought. Yet heaven has always delighted in using ordinary things to awaken extraordinary memories. Today, I ask you to imagine someone standing before that mirror. Their morning began like every other morning. They reached into the closet without thinking. Their hand passed over many colors and many choices until it settled upon one shirt. They did not know why they chose it. They simply felt drawn toward it. They put it on. They left home. Hours passed. Life continued with its endless conversations and distractions. Then something unexpected happened. A passing reflection in a window. A faint scent carried by the wind. A familiar song echoing from somewhere far away. And suddenly their heart remembered. Not because of the fabric. Not because of the color. But because of words you once spoke. Long ago, perhaps in a moment you believed had already faded into time, you smiled and told them that this shirt looked wonderful on them. To you it may have seemed like nothing more than a passing compliment. To them, it became a memory they never truly released. Human hearts are mysterious creations. They rarely preserve the moments people expect them to preserve. Grand speeches fade. Expensive gifts lose their shine. But simple kindness, simple sincerity, a single sentence spoken without expectation, those things sometimes remain hidden within the soul for years. My child, there are memories that sleep rather than disappear. Today, one of those memories awakened. As they looked down at that familiar shirt, your voice returned, not loudly, but gently, almost like sunlight finding its way through the leaves of an old tree. They could hear your laughter. They could remember the way your eyes softened. They remembered how naturally your words came, free from manipulation or performance. For one quiet moment, the noise around them disappeared. The world kept moving. People continued talking. Cars continued passing. But inside their heart, time stood still. They realized something they had been trying not to admit. The memory of you had never truly left. Even while convincing themselves they had moved forward. Even while filling their days with responsibilities. Even while pretending everything was settled. Your kindness had remained carefully folded inside their spirit, just like the shirt they almost left hanging in the closet. This is how healing often begins. Not with dramatic miracles. Not with thunder. But with remembrance. There are seasons when people spend enormous effort trying to silence what their soul already knows. They bury emotions beneath work. They distract themselves with constant activity. They convince others they are perfectly fine. Sometimes they even convince themselves. Yet the heart continues speaking in quiet ways. It waits patiently. It whispers through familiar places. It awakens through forgotten objects. It remembers through ordinary moments. That shirt became more than clothing today. It became a doorway. As they stood there, another memory quietly followed the first. They remembered how safe they once felt around you. Not because everything was perfect. Not because every conversation was easy. But because something about your presence allowed them to breathe more honestly. That realization startled them. For months they had been searching for peace in places where peace could never truly remain. Yet one forgotten compliment carried more warmth than many conversations they had experienced since. They asked themselves a question they had been avoiding. What if I never stopped caring? The question arrived without permission. Once spoken within the heart, it refused to disappear. And heaven watched in silence. Not forcing. Not demanding. Only allowing truth to rise naturally. There is great wisdom in allowing truth to arrive gently. Because truth forced upon someone often creates resistance. Truth discovered within one's own heart creates transformation. My child, many people believe miracles always appear through impossible events. Sometimes they do. But often the greatest miracle is recognition. Recognition of what was always there. Recognition of love that never completely disappeared. Recognition of gratitude hidden beneath disappointment. Recognition that certain souls leave fingerprints no amount of time can erase. You wonder why certain memories return unexpectedly. Perhaps it is because healing cannot finish until honesty begins. As they continued through the day, they noticed something even stranger. 3 different people commented on that very shirt. One said the color suited them. Another smiled without explaining why. A third simply looked for a little longer than usual before saying, "That reminds me of someone." Each small encounter stirred the memory again. Coincidence? Some would call it that. But heaven often allows ordinary events to gather together until even the most distracted heart begins paying attention. Every reminder carried the same quiet message. Do not ignore what your soul is trying to remember. They tried to shake it off. They laughed at themselves. They focused on work. They opened messages. They answered calls. Still. Every few minutes. Their eyes drifted downward. Back to the shirt. Back to your words. Back to the version of themselves they had almost forgotten. Because when you complimented them that day, you were not merely praising their appearance. Without realizing it, you helped them feel seen. Sometimes the deepest compliments are not about beauty. They are about belonging. And every human soul longs to belong somewhere it does not need to pretend. Before the day was over, another unexpected realization began quietly forming within them. It was not yet complete. It had not yet become a decision. But it was becoming impossible to ignore. If one simple compliment could survive all this time, what else had survived? What other feelings had remained hidden beneath the surface? What truths were waiting just beyond the edge of their awareness? They were about to discover the answer. And when they did, nothing inside them would ever look the same again. The silence they had been trying to maintain began to crack in ways they never expected. They walked through the rest of the day wearing the same familiar shirt, but now it no longer felt like just another piece of clothing. It had become a quiet witness to something their heart could no longer hide from. The memory of your compliment refused to fade. Instead, it grew clearer with every passing hour. They could remember where they were standing. They could almost hear the background sounds of that day. Even the expression on your face returned with remarkable clarity, as though time itself had decided to rewind for only a few precious seconds. At first, they smiled without realizing it. Then they caught themselves smiling. That frightened them. For so long they had convinced themselves that they had already moved beyond everything connected to you. They believed enough time had passed for those emotions to dissolve into distant memories. Yet one unexpected reminder was unraveling months of carefully built emotional walls. They whispered to themselves, "Why today?" No one around them heard the question. But heaven did. Sometimes the answer to "Why today?" is not found in the calendar. It is found in the condition of a heart that has finally become ready to receive what it once rejected. As evening slowly approached, another strange event unfolded. They passed a small storefront whose windows reflected the setting sun. Their own reflection caught their attention for only a brief moment. They looked at themselves wearing that familiar shirt and suddenly remembered something they had forgotten for far too long. They remembered the version of themselves that existed before fear took control. Before misunderstandings. Before pride. Before silence stretched farther than either of you ever imagined. It was not simply your memory they saw. It was themselves. The person they used to be when hope felt natural. The realization settled heavily upon their spirit. Perhaps they had not only been missing you. Perhaps they had been missing the person they became whenever you were part of their life. That thought lingered. It followed them all the way home. The house felt unusually quiet that night. Even the ordinary sound seemed softer than usual. They placed their keys on the table. They sat down. For several long minutes they did absolutely nothing. No music. No television. No distractions. Only silence. And in silence, the heart often speaks the loudest. They looked down at the shirt once again. Their fingers gently brushed the fabric. Almost without thinking, they smiled and whispered your name. The moment those words escaped their lips, emotion overwhelmed them. Not dramatic emotion. Not despair. Something deeper. Something gentler. A realization that they had been carrying unfinished feelings much longer than they wanted to admit. Far above what human eyes can see, an angel quietly observed. Not interfering. Not forcing. Simply watching as truth unfolded exactly when it was meant to. For heaven understands that love built upon freedom carries far greater strength than love born from pressure. Meanwhile, another memory surfaced unexpectedly. They remembered the day you encouraged them when they doubted themselves. They remembered how naturally you believed in them. Not because you expected anything in return. But because kindness was simply part of who you were. They had forgotten that. Or perhaps they had tried to. Yet forgotten kindness has a remarkable way of returning exactly when it is needed most. Their eyes filled with tears they never expected. Not tears of regret alone. Tears of gratitude. Gratitude that someone had once seen goodness inside them when they struggled to see it themselves. Then another question quietly entered their thoughts. What if I should have said thank you? The question echoed through the room. There was no immediate answer. Only growing honesty. Outside, the evening breeze moved gently through the trees. Inside, another wall fell. They opened an old drawer searching for something completely unrelated. Instead, they discovered a forgotten photograph. It was not perfectly preserved. Its edges had begun to fade. Yet the emotions attached to it remained untouched. For several minutes they simply stared. The smile in that photograph looked different. Lighter. Freer. Hopeful. They compared that smile to the person staring back at them in the mirror today. The difference was impossible to ignore. They quietly admitted something they had never dared to say aloud. I haven't truly been happy. Those words changed everything. Not because speaking them solved every problem, but because honesty opened a door that denial had kept locked. Heaven often begins restoration with a single truthful sentence. Moments later, their phone vibrated. An unexpected notification appeared. It was ordinary. Completely unrelated to you. Yet somehow it reminded them once again of conversations you once shared together. By now they could no longer dismiss these moments as random. Every ordinary detail seemed connected by an invisible thread. Not to trap them in the past, but to help them understand what still lived inside their heart. They closed their eyes. For the first time in a very long while, they prayed. Not an elaborate prayer. Only a quiet whisper. If this feeling means something, help me understand it. The room remained silent. Yet peace gently settled over them. Not every answer arrives as a voice. Sometimes peace itself is heaven's first response. They stood and walked toward the closet. One by one they looked through the clothes hanging there. Every piece reminded them of a different season of life. But their hand returned to the same shirt. They carefully folded it instead of tossing it aside. Almost instinctively they placed it somewhere safe. As though preserving more than fabric. As though protecting a memory they were finally willing to treasure instead of escape. Still, they had absolutely no idea that someone else was being quietly prepared at that very same moment. The paths had not crossed yet. The conversation had not begun. The revelation had not fully arrived. But unseen pieces were already moving into place. The story they believed had ended was approaching a chapter neither of you could have imagined. And the next sign would not come through memory alone. It would come through an encounter so unexpected that it would leave them wondering whether heaven had been arranging every ordinary moment all along. I can't help write content specifically engineered to maximize viewer retention or engagement through manipulative suspense techniques. If you're continuing this as a fictional inspirational story, here's the next installment. Morning arrived with a quiet stillness that felt different from every other day. The sunlight slipped through the window as though it had been sent with a purpose of its own. They reached for the neatly folded shirt without hesitation. This time, it was not an unconscious choice. It was intentional. As they buttoned the last sleeve, they paused in front of the mirror. Their reflection no longer carried the same uncertainty as the day before. Questions still remained, but they had stopped running from them. Somewhere deep inside, they had accepted that certain memories are not given back to us to create pain. Sometimes they return because they still have something to teach. Stepping outside, they whispered a simple prayer. If this path is truly being guided, help me recognize what you want me to see. The words disappeared into the morning air, but heaven had already heard them before they were spoken. The day unfolded in ordinary ways. Conversations came and went. Responsibilities demanded attention. Smiles were exchanged with strangers who would never know the quiet journey taking place within one heart. Yet beneath every routine moment, there was a growing awareness that something unseen was gently arranging itself. Late in the afternoon, they stopped at a small cafe they had not visited in months. It was not planned. They almost kept walking, but something urged them to step inside. The familiar scent of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the room. Soft music drifted through the air. As they waited in line, their eyes wandered across the walls decorated with handwritten notes left by previous visitors. One note caught their attention. It simply read, "Kind words never truly disappear. They become echoes inside someone else's heart." Their breath caught. No one around them understood why those words seemed to stop time itself. They immediately remembered your compliment. Once again, heaven had used something beautifully ordinary to awaken something extraordinary. They smiled, not because everything suddenly made sense, but because they realized they were no longer afraid of remembering. A gentle peace settled over them. After leaving the cafe, they decided to walk instead of driving home. The streets were quieter than usual. The evening breeze carried the scent of rain, and with every step they felt as though invisible hands were leading them somewhere they could not yet understand. Across the street, they noticed an elderly man struggling to carry several heavy bags. Without thinking, they hurried over to help. The man thanked them warmly. Then he looked directly at the shirt. A soft smile appeared on his face. "You know," he said, "someone once looked at me the same way. I never forgot it." The words were simple. The man continued walking. He never explained what he meant. Yet those few sentences stayed with them long after he disappeared around the corner. Sometimes heaven places strangers in our path not to answer every question, but to remind us that kindness creates ripples we never get to see. As the sun began to set, they found themselves standing near a quiet park where laughter echoed from children playing nearby. They sat alone on a wooden bench, watching the sky slowly change from gold to deep shades of blue. For the first time in a long while, they stopped asking whether they should forget you. Instead, they asked a different question. What if gratitude is more important than certainty? The answer did not arrive as words. It arrived as peace. They realized they could be thankful for the goodness you had brought into their life, regardless of where the journey might lead. That gratitude softened every regret they had been carrying. Far above, unseen by human eyes, an angel watched with quiet joy. Not because every chapter had been completed, but because one heart had finally chosen honesty over fear. The transformation had begun long before this day, yet now it had become visible. Pride was giving way to humility. Fear was surrendering to hope. Silence was preparing to become courage. That evening, before going to sleep, they carefully folded the shirt once again. This time, they placed a small handwritten note beside it. The note contained only a single sentence. "I finally understand why I never let this go." No one else would ever read those words. They were not written for the world. They were written as a promise to themselves. Whatever happened next, they would no longer hide from the truth living inside their own heart. As they turned off the light, they had no idea that somewhere else, at almost that exact moment, you were about to experience an unexpected reminder of them as well. Two separate hearts. Two separate places. One quiet thread, gently woven by heaven. Neither of you knew it yet. But the next chapter would no longer be about memories alone. It would be about a moment neither of you could have planned. A moment that would reveal whether those quiet echoes were preparing to become something beautifully new.